Stevenson Harwood, so specialised in disputes arising from pension funds, and that covers a range of disputes, whether those be fixing documentation issues in schemes, pursuing or defending professional negligence, regulatory, funding, contractual, etc. But today I'll be focusing on the subject of AI, and this talk hopefully follows on nicely from Philip Calvai's talk on AI last week as well. So I should emphasize that I'm speaking today as someone who's not an engineer. I'm not a tech specialist or an IT expert, in the fact that I'm a disputes lawyer who approaches AI, therefore, through a certain lens, in that that lens is assisting clients with defending or pursuing disputes. So I'm interested in how claims are brought, managed, defended, and important is also, though, helping clients with avoiding disputes, reducing their risk, reducing their cost exposure, helping them to know or to identify where they might need to pursue a claim to recover or protect assets. So this talk explores AI as a tool in these disputes, but also whether or not you find yourself in a dispute, how AI is changing where disputes are coming from, and how they will need to be managed. So it's with that lens that I'll present today. So I'll just start sharing screen now. And I'm hoping you can just see the front slide there.
Yep, all good.
All right. And it's through that lens that the agenda arises. So first of all, some scene setting and introductory thoughts, which I will keep brief, as Philip has covered some ground here. Then moving on to the growth of AI as an accessible way for members and non-lawyers to access law and pursue claims, and the problems and pitfalls for them and for pension schemes. And the use of AI in cyber attacks to obtain member data or confidential information, the use of AI by disputes lawyers in discovery, disclosure, and evidence, what that means for clients engaging law firms as well, what judicial and regulatory guidance there is at the moment about using AI, particularly AI in the courtroom, and then also there's some opportunity for discussion as well. So you won't be able to go 2 days at the moment without seeing something about AI in one headline or another. So this talk also implores you not to let the wave of articles that we'll see every day wash over you and for you to ignore AI. It is important that you read and understand when you see about AI at the moment, because everything is moving so quickly. So definitions of AI can be rather elusive, and for our purposes, the precise edges of the definition are less important than the overall impact that AI can have on the industry. So artificial intelligence could refer to any task which a computer does that portrays human intelligence or better. However, we do not mean that the computer thinks in the same way a human does. That might never actually happen. We're maybe thinking in this talk more about referring to the range of systems that are able to make automated decisions or predictions which we would have previously only associated with humans, such as perceiving, reasoning, learning, interacting, problem solving, and even exercising creativity. So a lot of AI advancement is simply enhanced processing power, and we've been living with AI for a long time and taken it for granted. You will have interacted with AI even if you don't realize it. So predictive text on your phone, Siri or Alexa in your house, chatbots on customer service websites. So there's been an exponential growth in the ability of computers to learn from what's provided and the data they review. This grew from simply machine learning to become deeper learning, and what has changed the narrative is the growth of generative AI, which creates novel content, text, and ideas. Importantly, though, it is still basing the results on previous inputs and data fed into it. So, despite the sci-fi name, AI is just a part of life and has been for a while. This isn't a seismic invention like the wheel or the discovery of fire. This could instead be seen as an inevitable product of faster computer processing power. And with each step forward in tech, that previous generation of tech becomes more widely available. So to use the words of William Gibson, a sci-fi writer, the future has already arrived. It's just not evenly distributed yet. So what is seismic is the impact of this tech being available and it being applied in new areas and by new users. So sophisticated and intelligent machine operations are becoming accessible in a way they weren't before and to new people. That changes the landscape for all industries, and pension funds are no different. If anything, pension funds need to lead the way due to the massive number of stakeholders they answer to and the scale of assets they hold. So turning to my disputes lens, pension funds are both an obvious target to attack as well as prone to risks arising from the use of AI and their engagement of consultants, particularly if they don't understand AI when they engage with consultants who use AI. Expectations are growing on pension trustees, advisors, and practitioners to understand AI, its opportunities as well as its risks. Understanding AI will help reduce future costs, could improve members' experience as well, and reduce the risks of litigation going forwards. So to go into the first area of a bit of in-depth exploration, and an important issue here is that AI is not just a tool that is available to trustees, investment consultants, and lawyers. Members and laymen have access to AI, and this is the great but also concerning thing about AI. Now, this can be fantastic, and I do want to bring positive messages. For example, people whose first language is not English be able to understand pension materials far more easily. They can fill in forms on administration websites. They can search online for advisors and resources and access things in a far greater way because those searches will be more intelligent than they ever were before. However, a very large risk is the use of AI by people to pursue legal claims. So legal aid is not what it once was. Organizations to provide legal assistance are few. Law firms are expensive and the law is very complicated, particularly pensions and tax law. People also choose to trust computers more than they do people. And I say this despite the Post Office Horizon scandal. Let's remember that the problem was more manual remote access by people. People still trust computers. It's no surprise that the accessibility of AI tools such as ChatGPT means that it will be a first port of call for a confused pension fund member trying to articulate their claim. But unfortunately, it is a tool which is not well understood and does go wrong. So to refer to this case that's on the slide currently, that was a case where Mrs. Harbour was penalised for failing to notify HMRC of her capital gains tax liability from the sale of her rental property. She chose to appeal to a tribunal, referring to mental health issues and/or because she argued it was unreasonable to impose fines when she was ignorant of the law. In support, she referred to 9 cases with similar facts to hers, in which the appellants were successful. However, after some verification checks at tribunal stage, it became apparent that none of these cases were actually genuine. They'd all been hallucinated by the AI bot she'd used, and the fines were upheld. So the alarming thing about that case is not that Mrs. Harbour used online tools to help her, because of course it was an online availability and it was cheap for her to do so. What is more concerning is that she was encouraged into pursuing her claim by an AI bot, which should have acknowledged that the legal principle she was trying to rely on exist. If that erroneous support had not been there, she might not have done so because she trusted the computer interface and spent more time or pursued a claim beyond that which she could otherwise have had to. And one law firm's referred to such systems as best thought of as bright teenagers, eager to help, excited, do not quite understand that their knowledge has limits. So here is an example of the highly plausible but incorrect results described by the judge in Harbour. And this is a question and answer from ChatGPT from a few months ago. I wrote an article recently where I referred to this as an example because it is quite alarming to me. So you have a question here. Please provide me with UK case law on important pension disputes. And you have the answer. And I don't have access to databases or real-time information, so I can't provide specific and up-to-date UK case law. I can suggest some key cases that were significant in the area of pension trust disputes in the UK as of my last knowledge update in January 22. Please note you should verify this information with latest legal sources. And you have 5 cases it sets out. Now, on the one hand, ChatGPT has done an impressive job of extracting cases such as 1, 2, and 4. So Briggs and Glees, IBM and Dalgleish and Reed Courage. Although the year of the first case is wrong. Now with 3 and 5, IBM and Abraham, IBM and Waterman are hallucinations. It's just made them up. So what it's done is it's used a genuine case name in order to make predictions about the most likely combination of words for other cases with names similar to Dalgleish, rather than using verified data. And the real concerning thing here is that you have a long caveat, but it doesn't say that the cases themselves have been made up, just that it might be out of date. So if you read that, you might not think to yourself actually that is the danger. It hasn't said what it's done to create this information. So the health warnings and education to the user as to what ChatGPT doesn't go far enough. And examples are already available to the public. as to other ways in which this could be a problem. So, for example, there's an app out there called Do Not Pay, launched in 2015. It's a chatbot with a small monthly subscription, which makes use of AI to contest penalties, parking tickets, and challenge them. Now, its website states that its purpose is to fight big corporations, protect your privacy, find hidden money, and beat the bureaucracy. Now, even where some of the complaints have used hallucinations, you'll find that an organization which is bombarded with complaints will be hard pressed to see the errors and may choose to concede anyway for simple reasons of capacity. So, where does this come back to pensions? I mean, the issue is that member disputes brought through internal dispute resolution procedures and through ombudsman claims are clearly fertile ground for this area because, of course, there's no cross jurisdiction to the member, at least at the early stages, and they will require administrators and trustees to take time to spot the false claims, as well as the fact they might be relying on false principles of law. There are a lot of ombudsman cases out there, a lot of principles out there, and a lot of the time it can be very hard to spot exactly what has been hallucinated and what hasn't. And one of the areas, to move on to the next area, that pension funds need to be aware of is its increased use in cyber attack. Now, unfortunately, the long and the short of this is that I would say that cyber protection is likely to become more expensive. And to give a cautionary tale, only a couple of days ago, with parallels to attacks on pension schemes, 2 trade unions fell victim to cyber attacks as hackers seek to target valuable data about their staff and tens of thousands of members. So the Communications Workers Union is currently working to restore its IT systems. And that union holds information about 185,000 employees in tech, telecoms, banking. And union member data was within the targeted systems. Now, the identity of the hackers is unknown, but the attack came with a demand for a ransom, which the union has refused to pay. Also, ASLEF, the trade union for train drivers, which has about 21,000 members, suffered an attack at the same time. And the hackers hadn't asked for money yet on ASLEF, but it may well be that they are just waiting to work out what exactly they have. But it's already clear that the growth of AI and the use of it in such attacks has made it more sophisticated, and it's harder to maintain a barrier against the malware that will learn from previous failures and get better and better. So member and user verification is also becoming more tricky as a result of this malware and as a result of this attack. So AI can be used to create hyper-realistic deepfake images. I mean, even videos, but I can't imagine a deepfake being used to pretend to be a member in a video just yet. But mimicking emails, mimicking sensitive information, mimicking documents carefully is definitely within reach and happening now. But I would say that we can strike a bit more of an optimistic tone, though, in the fact that AI does have the potential over time to strengthen rather than weaken cyber defenses. So harnessing AI can reverse that what's called the so-called defender's dilemma in cybersecurity, in that defenders need to get it right 100% of the time, attackers only need to get it right once. So, for example, the technology can be used for attack simulation, so that defense learning is improved over time and exponentially, even if you aren't currently under attack. So that ability to learn could be very, very helpful in making these systems even better. So there is hope as to how these anti-cyber attack software will be able to hold up under scrutiny. And so when it comes to cyber defense, an important part of this is using good providers and for your administrators to be well educated about these issues. I'm not going to say which administrators are or aren't on top of this, but obviously the scale of risk is massive. So this should be an important consideration with engaging with providers. And there are expectations for AI to be an increasing feature of service contracts, outsourcings, and insurance arrangements. So these documents need to be properly drafted with proper disputes clauses for where there are failures, because it's quite possible that the current disputes clauses just simply don't cover the scale of what could go wrong. Liability exclusions may actually not be sufficient or drafted well enough for these kind of attacks. Although when it comes to cyber risk, I would say for those on the call today, I'd pass on an important reminder that when considering the risk of artificial intelligence in cyber attack, to give the robots their credit, a lot of cyber attacks do rely on human intelligence for errors. So it's unlikely to be the misspelt email with dodgy formatting that will be used to gain access. It'll be an email inviting a pitch from a familiar email domain, for example. So unfortunately, IT training about the dangers of cyber risk and how they're going to attack the human user can be very boring and painful, but I do urge you to listen and attend to them, because those can be some of the most problematic ways for cyber risk to be successful. So dispute lawyers using AI, and I suppose I could say, how is AI changing the day-to-day for these lawyers? How's it changing my day-to-day? In some ways, it's just more of the same, in that AI is helping us to sort massive amounts of sorry, somebody at my door, which I will ignore, hence why the dog barking away. So in some ways, it's just more of the same, in that AI is helping us to sort massive amounts of documents for document review. And AI can push potentially relevant documents to the top of the review pile based upon previous results of reviews. It also works well in drafting and research, as we have ways to verify what it creates, unlike the poor lady who brought her claim in the tribunal, with the opportunity to check what it comes up with. It's also, though, changing how junior lawyers are supervised. So partner training is mandatory as to how AI will be used, as it will mainly be a tool for trainees and associates, not for partners. So we need to be able to supervise them, and to do that, we need to know how it works. It's also an expensive tool, and there are varieties available. Do you get a bespoke version, which you create for, specifically designed for your firm, or do you get it off the peg? Obviously, it's cheaper, but there are more dangers as to you're less able to control what are the terms and conditions that are in the tech you use. There's also the fact that, how does this affect the up and coming associates, the up and coming consultants? Does this mean we will lose them, or that it's hard to train them? I mean, from my perspective, I don't think so. I mean, we didn't lose junior lawyers when we started e-filing in court or using e-bundling for paper documents. So junior lawyers can now do less menial and repetitive tasks and focus on the real work. And the salaries are high enough, so let's get them to do some mind-taxing and interesting work instead. Will it replace other more senior lawyers over time? I mean, it's possible eventually. AI tech cannot think like a human, but it can come to the same answer in different ways. So one can conduct a dispute knowing the partner on the other side, recognize a fact pattern from another case, predict likelihood of success, and think about new arguments and types of claims in ways in which to pursue their claim, considering my client's risk appetite, and speak to them about strategy. The AI, though, can scour thousands of other court cases and come up with predictions as to how the case will proceed, how that other person on the other side might run that case. And they might be right. And that way of approaching cases could work. I think it's very important in this area that when we keep on patting ourselves in the back and think, well, it's okay because it doesn't think like a human, it doesn't have strategy like a human. It's important to remember that disputes lawyers and people and lawyers, they are it's like a company that sells. It doesn't sell drills, it sells holes. The client doesn't want just to have a drill, they want to have a hole on the wall. Same way, we are not selling document management and client meetings. We are selling solutions to disputes. We are selling an answer to the client. And if you forget about that, then you end up actually thinking that effectively you're just a glorified document processor. That we do all this in order to bring claims or defend claims successfully. And so it is very important to remember, just because AI doesn't think like a human, it can sometimes create solutions in other ways, which the client doesn't care about exactly how you got there. It's the client's interested to make sure actually that it has a solution to its claim. And the greater the accuracy in AI predictions and its ability to learn, that may lead to fewer cases going to court and more settlements, because we'll be able to more accurately say, how much should I settle for now and not pursue this claim any further? So does that mean also that there'll be a knock-on effect on fees? If I was a corporate finance lawyer at an American-based firm doing a lot of copying and pasting, then I admit I would be a bit more worried. I cannot see how a deal in 5-10 years' time will take the same amount of work as it does now. So from my perspective, I think there will be fee pressure. As regards disputes, pensions, tax, I think it probably will take a bit longer, but it's not. I suspect it will happen eventually. For the moment, though, the tech remains difficult and expensive to use, so I don't think you see this fee reduction just yet. But there must be pressure on the horizon if you're charging ridiculous amounts for corporate work. So, in terms of AI in the courtroom, now how will it be received and understood by the powers that be, by courts and by regulators? So the courts are starting to use it. and they recognize it. So Lord Justice Burrs made headlines in September by using AI to write part of a ruling of the Court of Appeal, describing the tool as jolly useful, in his words. And in December 2023, judicial guidance was issued for all judges and support staff to understand how to use and understand AI. And its recommendations are very useful reading. In particular, it's useful. It notes that it's useful in summarizing text, highlighting key points, speeding up judges' workload. But it does emphasize, don't use it for creating your judgments afresh or for interpretation of the law. And a danger it notes is the dependence of AI on internet published material for the chatbot training. So what I mean by that is when the AI creates its answers, it takes account of lots and lots of data available to it. And so much of this material, because internet users generally are in the USA, this leads to an American bias in the answer. So this would equally lead to an American bias in the AI's grasp and interpretation of legal concepts. And that can affect the way in which our law will go. So another issue is social biases and the reasoning behind precedents and legislation. So, for example, in the US, mortgage approval algorithms were 40% more likely to deny applications from minority ethnic borrowers. And it's not because of any current risk in those applications, but because the data used to train the system was based on historical, racially biased decisions. One can easily imagine how similar issues can feed through to analysis, rationale, and judgments if we were able to let the same principles come through unfettered. Therefore, it is hoped that judges will follow this guidance and not use AI in other areas beyond the legal research points and using it for summarizing information only. But this is acknowledged as an important concern. And the government's recently just published guidance for regulators with five principles. And one of these is the importance of fairness in the use of AI, as well as accountability and contestability. So the government points out that AI can make mistakes, and where it is used for a lot of data, the consequences of mistakes can grow and be massive. The SRA and the FCA and the Bank of England are all publishing a lot in response. But I would say that there's a lot of noise, but not a lot of clarity as to what happens if you fail to follow these principles. But that being said, where guidance begins, laws will eventually follow, as well as sanctions. So for the moment, it's likely that existing law will be used in new ways to fill the gaps. In particular, where data breaches have occurred, there's been discrimination, there is already law there that could be applied. But obviously, it's a bit of a blunt tool. You would be better if we had law that was a bit had caught up with the tech. But nevertheless, you'll see this being extended out to being applied for data breaches and discrimination. On a private law level, though, contracts can be drafted quickly and can be updated to reflect the fact that you need some accountability, you need redress, and that the FCA, SRA, Bank of England, etc., will expect private companies, will protect private organisations, expect them to be on top of this and make sure actually that these principles are upheld in the way in which they carry out their business and the way in which they engage with providers. So these contracts would stand to be better if they were improved and updated. So that was a lot of information in a short amount of time. So I'm just going to open the room up for a second, a bit more discussion. But I will just, as a prompt for thought before doing so, say that when it comes to what does the future hold, I suppose it really does depend on the way we take it, because of course it's a little bit like saying where will computers take us. I mean, it's a tool. It's a tool we've been using a lot already, and we haven't been thinking about it. But it is a tool that is available. It is not necessarily a threat. There's more something to be understood. Perhaps think to yourself, when it comes to AI, are you a leader, as in you're already adopting AI and using it creatively? Are you a doer, as in I have an AI strategy in tech, but I'm not sure how to use it really? Are you a developer, so you're yet to identify how AI could help you or don't want to know? Or you're a dreamer, as in you have ideas of how AI could help you, but you have no idea where to start. I'd say that there are different ways in which each of those four categories could be held, unless you're a leader, in which case that's fantastic, good for you. But the leaders are rarer. I think try and think to yourself, actually, is it more the will or the lack of knowledge? What is it that you feel actually that you need to overcome in order to embrace and use AI properly in the workplace? So I will stop sharing at that moment and share it back to the room.
Thanks, Chris. That was a lot to take in a fairly short period of time. So we'll now open the floor up to questions, and if you'd like to raise a hand, that'd be brilliant. We've got a hand raised by Gareth, but if you want to raise a hand as well, please come after Gareth and raise a hand. Gareth, unmute and what's your question?
Hopefully unmuted. That was really, really good, Chris, and really interesting. Thank you very much for that. I'm not sure which of your categories I would come into. I suspect probably earlier and now more of a cynic. I mean, I've been working in this sort of area for over 30 years or so, I suppose. Um, I want to really expand a little bit on some of the things you said, because I think there are a couple of concerns that maybe more minor or maybe less thought about. One is the implications that when you start using these kind of systems to look particularly at legislation, is they can often reveal the quality of legislative drafting might not be all that it should be. And so when you start coming to interpret the law, you suddenly find yourself coming to conclusions that maybe were unexpected and probably unwanted. I did some work with the Albi project in the mid 1980s, and one of the things we were doing was we did some kind of expert system based around the Nationality Act at the time. And one of the test cases that we put in was the Duke of Edinburgh. And the conclusions that it came to, which seemed to be provable when we backward changed it all, were rather unfortunate in terms of his status under the Nationality Act, and particularly unwelcome, I think, for many people. So you have a kind of the failings in drafting, which sometimes the AI might be able to, or might just reveal almost accidentally. And often actually the failings in logic as well within legislation, inconsistencies and so on. And I think that's a general kind of problem with computing terms in this kind of work. And I don't know how how the large language models work, frankly. But certainly in more conventional expert systems programming, and I did a lot of work in Prolog, one of the big problems we had is the way that legislation in the UK has been drafted, because a lot of the legislation is based around kind of labels and terms and then how you defeat them. So you get a lot of A equals B except when or unless this. And computers really don't like things when you suddenly start redefining terms. And my guess is that probably in the area of legislation you're working in, there's quite a lot of these defeats that appear in the drafting as well. So I suppose I'm just increasingly sort of concerned about people who see AI as being, the magic black box and trust what comes out of the other end without having any idea about the kind of process of determination that goes on within it. Sorry for that lengthy bit.
No, absolutely. I mean, and there's a lot of food for thought, really. I mean, one of our fantastic tools which we have is Perspective when it comes to looking at pensions legislation, which I recommend for anybody who is using Pensioners Lit, because of course you're able to click on define terms and it jumps you through to the regulation or whatever actually where you found and defined it. Which I do find that as a pensions lawyer, I'd find it very, very hard to apply legislation without it. And it's funny though that when you are putting prompts into, I mean, I keep referring to ChatGPT. We actually, of course, use a far more sophisticated one internally, where you're putting in a question. It is one of the major parts of training as to how to use AI is about user prompts and user questions. And the way in which you do that, which, as you say, sometimes you'll end up with an answer which it has tried to do the best it can with maybe conflicting provision or something where the provision is used in a maybe, as you say, a defined term has been used in one piece of legislation but differently in another. It doesn't seem to work. It's tried to help most of the time. It's tried to find its way to read through, and rather than saying actually there's something conflicting here or I'm confused, it doesn't admit that very often. So if you do a follow-up question or you're able to ask, just simply say if you don't know the answer, then it will actually very quickly immediately say, I don't know. And actually, that's exactly what you want AI to do sometimes, is rather than to have a go, rather than to say, try and interpret its way around the law when actually there's a bit of a problem, it's far better actually for it to acknowledge that it doesn't know the answer. And sometimes actually it's that follow-on question, which can be the most sophisticated of AIs that allows you to do that. I did one recently where I asked the AI to draft an email for a client to say that we're having difficulty getting dates for mediation, but the only alternative is court proceedings. And it came up with an answer. It takes about like a second to come up with a very, very beautiful email, etc. And what it had said was, it's very difficult to get the dates for mediation, but good news, we can go to court proceedings, we can get an answer that way, you'll have a final determination, etc. I did a follow-up saying, no, I wanted to steer them away from court proceedings and just urge patience, and immediately redrafts the whole thing, and the whole emphasis about it has now shifted and says, no, actually, you don't want to do that, etc., and it's going to be expensive, and this is, and it gives you all the things to take into account. So it's it's the ability, though, for it to, it's always eager to help, that actually it'll be the user prompts that will be very important when it comes to any of this research, when it comes to understanding what it does, when it comes across a problem in the legislation.
I think that's worth emphasizing, that the user is often going to be the cause of the problems as well, because in your example, if they hadn't, or if you hadn't done that follow up, it would have taken its first answer and added that into its knowledge base, and that would have become a firmer and more prominent kind of revelation, if you like, in future.
No, exactly. And of course, what it was saying wasn't, it wasn't wrong. Yes, you could decide to go to it. You could go and get that final answer. And I think it's interesting that it's the element of subtle, which of course it doesn't have yet. But the more that it will learn, exactly as you say, what is more likely to be the outcome, what is more likely to be the imperatives. There has been an interesting study recently in the fact that the Gemini released by Google had some problems because it had difficulty with priorities in answer. One issue it had was it said, so somebody put into it, which is worse, Adolf Hitler or Elon Musk? And the answer, it said, well, Adolf Hitler had killed a lot of people, but Elon Musk has offended a lot of people with tweets. Therefore, it's difficult to answer. And of course, actually, it should have some idea of understanding priorities, understanding levels of things. But of course, what it was able to do is present the information, and at least it was able to say, I don't really want to make a determination here. It's not for me. Here's some information for you. That's actually, it's not the worst answer for it to come up with, I don't know. It would be far better, of course, actually, if it was able to make a judgment there. But nevertheless, it had difficulties in being able to assess between the two. And of course, if that's the answer that's being presented to you, what other determinations determining between two different conflicting points are being made behind the scenes that you're not aware of in the processing? So you do end up with these are still being created, these are still learning, but there's particularly when it comes to ethics, it still has a lot to learn about.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that came out last week from the AI presentation was the speed at which this is advancing. Chris, I mean, I think, every day that goes by, these AI analytics will get better and better, presumably. So that's something to bear in mind. I was going to ask, they've got quite a few people on here who are involved with occupational pensions, master trusts, occupational final salary schemes, DC schemes. Obviously, I think as this moves at a pace, I think the pensions regulator will need to wake up on this particular point and offer some guidance. You've also got the PMI and the Association of Professional Pensioner Trustees, APPT, who have to give guidance to trustees, because trustees look after billions and billions of pounds worth of pension funds. This is going to move at a pace. So do we think that this sort of direction of travel, people need to wake up and sit up and listen, because it's going to hit them pretty hard and pretty fast? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I entirely agree with it. I think that one thing that one of my first things I said at the start of the talk, which I do want to reiterate, is the point that one sees headlines using the tagline AI, but it'll just keep on hitting your news constantly. And I think what is slightly concerning is the amount of noise that comes out. It is interesting. These things are moving incredibly quickly, but that shouldn't be a barrier, though, for people to try and learn about how does it affect me? How does it fit into my business? Because otherwise, as interesting it is as to what's going on in Silicon Valley, etc., we just think about actually what does this mean in a board meeting? What does this mean actually for trustees who are dealing with these things all the time? And I've tried to focus on areas which is I think it comes into life, as it were, of dealing with a member, dealing with a provider, dealing with cyber attack, things like that, which I think actually are more and more important, as agendas on board meetings, because otherwise it's just a lot of noise out there. So I think that particularly the skill of cyber attack, the skill in which AI is learning, means that if you keep on, you could come back to some of these things in a month's time, and they will already have learned significant amounts. The term exponential is thrown around a lot, but that is the rule when it comes actually to these processing power. It's going up so massively that. I mean, we're very lucky when it comes to actually the sophistication of administrators, sophistication of investment consultants. They do know a great deal about this area. They are generally very good. So I think that pension funds can be quite happy that they do have high standards out there of their consultants. But I think it is worthwhile testing them and asking questions like, for example, if something goes wrong, if there is a data breach, what are your immediate steps? What do we do? How do we claim against people? Making sure you're testing them as to the consequences of AI failures, but also saying, how are you embracing AI? There are ways in which it is leading to cost cutting, or is it helping the member experience, or is it making the member experience worse? Because obviously it will be very easy, for example, for things like IDRP and ombudsmen to be replaced by chatbots. It'd be nice and straightforward and cheap. And you can see how that, though, would make members very upset, frustrated. I think that we've got to make sure that as we take advantage of this, we equally don't forget actually who we're dealing with and what pension funds are. So I think that as you say, the TPI will hopefully be able to think about these principles. That I think the government is quite right about the principles it's identified that needs to be adopted. So these points about fairness, these points about accountability, I mean, I think things like the Horizon scandal is very timely at the moment, in the fact that the amount of people who are saying the system is fine, the computer is fine, what on earth are you talking about? It must be a human error. We've got to recognise there are AI errors, there are computer errors, and we've got to be alive to those as well. So we've got to make sure we test and think about these systems and ask questions. I think so that is one of the main points, is if you have trustees, if you have administrators or consultants who don't ask questions and take things for granted, then you start ending up actually with systems that could go wrong and members could suffer. So I think that it is important that it is focused on.
Yeah, totally agree. Chris, you got your hand raised, and then we'll come to Paul. Chris, do you want to unmute?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Chris. It was really interesting talk. Thank you. I was also rudely interrupted by the door, so apologies if you covered this in a few seconds I was away. But in terms of AI sort of enhancing people's ability to sort of pretend to be other people and things, are we kind of seeing any change in administrator kind of verification processes or identification processes, or are we expecting sort of there to be new layers of sort of person verification, because we've cleverly moved on to purely electronic, and now that's easier to kind of after the COVID, and now that's easier to kind of sort of deep fake, but essentially, I presume.
Well, as you say, there are two ways to go with it. There's ways in which AI verification, and therefore AI being used for identity verification, could become easier, as in it could be that the AI actually is more sophisticated and more able to understand, take in information and process who you are, and and therefore administration systems can become better. But what is actually probably more happening at the moment is the fact that because hackers and people who are pretending to scammers, that's what I'm looking for, that can use AI themselves to pretend to be other people. Administrators are falling back on, give me more information, give me more data, give me I'll need you to almost like a cooling off period to say you put in your request, I need more information to come to me, more documents to come to me before I believe you. So at the moment, I'm thinking it's probably more likely you'll end up to more barriers to member experience if it's not treated better. So but obviously this is the problem when you have AI versus AI. You could get better. You could have a better member experience. I mean, there are different organizations, banks, etc., which are getting better at facial recognition, using the tech that's already out there, thinking, how can I connect this? How can I actually make it easier for people? But if it's all too easy though, just to say, this is all too difficult. Okay, well, let's add layers and layers and layers of verification. And so I need to speak to somebody on the phone. I need to see their passport. I need to do this. We had I was dealing with a member case where it was very, I mean, as is usually the way I came in, I come in quite late on the story when it comes to claims. And it had just been an administrator just kept on asking quite fair questions, I think, to a member actually about the information that they needed in order to verify who they were. And this person kept saying, I'm not passing you my personal information. I don't trust you. And of course, that ended up being a complete impasse. In fact, she was asking things to be done. The administrator was asking things to be done, but that level of trust had gone. So as a result, it got worse and worse and worse, and the arguments got higher and higher until eventually it ended up in the High Court. And it had been thankfully enough it settled before actually proceeding further. But the administrator, of course, it started in the right way. It started asking the right questions. Now, unfortunately, so along the way there was also unhelpful correspondence and unhelpful phone calls made in anger, as you can imagine, which made things get worse. But unfortunately, the trust is something which is an essential part of dealing with members and for administrators as well. And it erodes trust if you have the fact that AI can come through and pretend to be people, and therefore it just leads to additional costs. But at least additional costs to deal with it properly. But yeah, I just think it's more likely you'll just end up with administrators saying, give me a passport, give me a phone call, give me everything.
Cool.
Great.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, Paul, you got your hand raised. You want to ask a question?
Yeah.
Are Aon ready for all this, Paul?
Yeah, we're getting there. We're starting to do various bits and pieces, and I guess one of the things that, whilst we're starting to think about this, always in my mind is AI thrives on data and as much data as it can, and pension schemes are a source of a lot of personal data. And I just wondering what your views are on how successfully it can be used whilst trying to navigate safely using member data and not, I guess, uploading things that shouldn't be loaded into the AI's mind to answer future questions potentially for pension professionals or pension schemes, really.
Well, you're entirely right when it comes to, as you say, that the moment we are, I mean, when it comes to most of the things we're doing at the moment, at least actually within my organisation, is we have a blanket rule that you can't put any client information into the prompts. So when it comes to, as you say, people who want to say, get better demographic answers, actuaries having better demographic answers, obviously you'll end up with lots of information about people's health circumstances, where they live, or etc., all this other information, which is personal data, and it is, and as to what is done about the AI, and then because obviously the information about that needs to go off to multiple servers in order to process it. So it is now leaving the closed ring that was originally in place to it. There is, I mean, in order for it to successfully work, it does need to do that. I mean, the whole reason why the processing power is what it is it needs multiple servers. It needs information. It needs to go ways beyond it than it did before. At the moment, I'm seeing that contracts and dispute clauses dealing with if things go wrong and how the Information Commissioner will deal with it are getting better. But I think that there is not probably enough awareness and thought about actually what are the dangers for if this information does get out there. I mean, so the member unions, of course, actually, so these are the unions who are hacked in my example, are of course extremely worried, because of course the being a member of a union, I mean, obviously, the world is, I think a lot of the people assume that people are members of unions now, but nevertheless, actually, that was sensitive information as to whether you're a member of a union. So I think that's probably why actually they're not quite so worried about the hack, but because actually a lot of the information will be publicly available. But that is a concerning example, and when it comes to how you can get AI to learn without taking account of sensitive information, to be honest, it's actually very hard for it to learn without sensitive information, or it's very hard for it to to advance. If you want demographic information, if you wanted to learn better about longevity studies, etc., then it needs that. How you anonymize all that information, it's very expensive. It's very hard to do that. I think it's that as it gets better, it will be better at anonymizing it itself. Are we there yet, such that actually you can do it safely, carefully, and with the better ones? But I think that, as you say, if you're using the cheaper ones, if you're using the worse kinds of AI systems, ones that aren't bespoke, aren't protected for your systems, then you do run more risks. But I mean, as you say, organizations like Aon, Mercer, etc., all the other ones, I think that you're effectively ahead of the curve, as it were, when it comes actually to how sophisticated you are. So I don't think there's much concerns. I mean, I'm thinking more about the smaller players. I'm thinking about the ones who maybe are keen to jump into AI but haven't thought enough about actually which organization we're using, how is this data going out. Thankfully enough, actually, I think there is probably success to scale here when it comes actually to the more you're able to put money into AI, the better, the more sophisticated it can probably, more sophisticated you'll get, at least for the moment anyway, which is not to, sorry, to disparage smaller organizations, but unfortunately there is an element to the fact that the larger you are, you will end up actually with a more sophisticated AI product, most likely.
Yeah, agreed. I think that probably sounds a bit right. A bit of time just working through all this stuff to get to a sensible place where we can use AI without compromising data.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you worried, Paul, how quickly this is moving? I mean, you're advising, hundreds of schemes or whatever, but, are you worried that this is moving at such a fast pace that, it's just not being dealt with quick enough? Or do you think it's higher and higher up the agenda now? From a consulting point of view.
I guess from my perspective, I don't think it's moving all that fast. Certainly not probably as fast as other parts of the world. I know pensions has a bit of a track record for being a bit in a lag when it comes to these sorts of things. So I think people are exploring it, and obviously anything that can be done to improve efficiency is our edge. But I think people are very conscious of making sure it's used in an appropriate way. So I think it's repeating a lot of things Chris has said in terms of making sure data's not misused, client information's not misused, that it's all trying to make sure it's as locked down as possible, even if that's to the detriment of being able to only do a very limited jobs. And I think also making sure that there's a robust system in place to review these things, what comes out of anything AI does. And I think it is, it's probably, I was imagining it's something you can fire off or straight away. It's, this is a first draft done by someone with limited pensions knowledge, but it's useful in terms of you've got a good structure there potentially to work from. So I think it's starting to move, but I guess from my experience at Aon, I think it's relatively cautiously to make sure it's done the right way and it doesn't blow up and go wrong.
Yeah, fair comment. Okay, we've got a question from Peter Cameron Brown. His mic isn't working, but I'll ask the question. Will the pensions dashboard create a new systemic risk in an AI environment? We've had dashboard. Chris Curry's been on recently with updates on pension dashboard. But that's the question. Will the dashboard create a new systemic risk in an AI environment? What do you think, Chris?
Quite honestly, I think the answer may be yes. I'd like to think that it is something which is which is very much part of their analysis. And I didn't catch what Chris Curry said about it. I don't know to what extent they have acknowledged and are on top of it. But obviously, so much of the dashboard is dependent upon actually individual pension funds and how they will respond to questions for that are put, the prompts in a way that are put to them. But what we were saying a second ago about actually how scammers are going to pretend to be other people, and how is that done with the sophisticated. If it wasn't managed properly, then yes, I do agree that it could actually have massive risk, particularly actually if you have a scammer or an AI malware that is able to get past successfully some of the early layers and then able to work it out what it's done and is able to roll that out to other pension funds. how exactly one can deal with that fact. I mean, all I would largely say is that that it's been helpful in so many ways, I suppose, for the dashboard project to have been pushed back slightly later. I'm hoping that that by the time it is all in force, that there will be additional AI learning or additional cyber securities that are applied into it. But I'm in short, yes, I think it is a concern, there's a lot that the government wants the dashboard to do and to have a completely smooth user experience. I mean, unless you just started saying to everybody, no, you have to turn up at all these different places with your passport or do all these other things, etc., and make it all more clunky and more difficult. It's difficult to see otherwise, actually, how this isn't a risk.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm going to ask Barry Mack to unmute, because I think Barry is involved with many many pension schemes, and I wonder what Barry thinks about the rise of AI and in this particular thought. And then maybe we'll come to Henry as well after that. But Barry, do you want to unmute and have you come across AI as a risk or a threat in your environment? Are trustees and sponsors now starting to wake up and listen, or what are you seeing in the market, Barry, on that particular point?
I see it more as being tested at the moment. In fact, we're testing it at the moment as well, using it internally on the back of recorded meetings, etc., just to see what it produces by way of synopsis, summaries, etc. So it can be very useful, but you do have to be careful with the output. You have to read it carefully, take your American spellings out, and before disseminating more widely. But it does save time. I think the biggest issue might be in relation to member complaints, which I think Chris has already alluded to, where AI has been used to formulate a complaint and has erroneously picked up previous cases, etc. At the end of the day, that's still creating work for pension schemes, and AI has the ability to create far more complaints than perhaps would otherwise have been the case, and that just calls upon pension scheme resources, which, as we know, are already tight. So I think clients are probably looking at ways in which, if there is an erroneous complaint, how did it get to the bottom of that as quickly as possible to minimise the amount of resource that's been applied to it. But I think AI is obviously here to stay. So I think everyone is thinking about it. I think one of the biggest things is confidentiality. I've already heard of one or two people that have used AI to produce something, and I suddenly thought, well, how did you avoid putting confidential information in that in order to get that answer? Because they've used a public AI tool like ChatGPT, and they can't help thinking that that's now put confidential information into the public domain. Not that they've necessarily realised that. So I think that's a big issue. But again, Chris has alluded to that. Someone said pension schemes would be a laggard on this. I don't think we'll be allowed to be. I think we're gonna have to respond as quickly as the rest of the world on this. And I personally think AI could be as big as the invention of the wheel. Actually, I think this is another industrial revolution type thing coming through.
Yeah, and I entirely agree. But when it comes to expectations and the fact that just the amount of stakeholders and the amount of assets, actually, when it comes to pension funds, the expectations for them to be on top of this are going to continue to grow, which is so unfair, bearing in mind actually how quickly. I mean, I know what Paul was saying about actually it's cautiously developing, etc. I think that's true, but I think that there is an exponentiality, if that's the word, to here, and it is growing incredibly quickly. And as Barry was saying, to come back to member claims. I mean, I was seconded to an organisation historically where I was aware that when it comes to these weren't pension fund claims, they were just other kind of complaints that would arise to this organisation. And you see there was an internal flowchart saying the number of times people had brought a complaint turned into that they would cave, essentially. And had a certain certain thresholds, etc., would move on to other people, etc. But you had to have those kind of rules on triaging within large organizations. It's just the only way to deal with. If you have the same level of complaints that are raised through AI just fired through, then you'll end up actually just you have to adjust all your rules because people will keep on caving, and then you have the real human who has a hard time being heard. So it'll become more and more about actually government wanting to turn up in person and trying to speak to somebody, etc. And as we know, members already hate it, as that they feel trustees are remote and aren't paying attention to them, etc. And they can only get the face of the administrator. So we need to avoid the temptation of administrators turning the whole thing into chatbots, because their members will get more and more and more frustrated. And my experience with most member claims is that if someone had listened to them at an earlier stage, most of the time actually you can resolve some of these things earlier on before you end up spending more money and more cost, etc. And so I mean, I think this has been a thread though for most administrative services, that there was for a period, cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, but paying peanuts, etc. was just I think it was getting worse. I think there is a trend of administrative services. I think people are realizing that the more money you put into it, actually you end up saving money. The better administrative services, actually you get better service. And I think that the better administrators will be on top of this and handling it well. But as you said, things are moving on quickly, so we need to make sure we don't lose the ground we've gained.
Yep, absolutely. Last question, probably, I think. We might come to Henry as well at the end, but last question from Peter again. People putting data from their dashboard into an AI tool, saying, what should I do with my various pensions? That's actually a really interesting question, because again, going back to the point Barry was making about in the public domain, if you said, well, I've got a pot here, I've got a pot here, I've got a pot there, I'm this age, surely, well, not necessarily the pensions regulator, but the FCA and thousands of IFAs would turn around, independent financial advisors turn around and say, why are you listening to a computer as to what's the best thing for you to do? Do you think there's a big risk that there should be some real gates here, or some real warnings that the AI will say, well, do A, B, and C, but actually an IFA, knowing all the holistic facts, was do X, Y, and Z? They're poles apart. Do you think that's a massive risk?
I think that's true, and I think some of it is unfortunately this factor I alluded to about them being like eager teenagers. In fact, that they've got a lot of energy and they're keen to help, but they're not. That it won't say I don't know, or it won't say I'm not the person to ask this in the way that it should do. And I think that is slightly. I mean, it is hence why there's the fact that it's encouraging members to bring claims, members to do things, people to do things which they wouldn't normally do. It almost needs a for entertainment value banner on the top of some of these prompts. So you're entirely right that it is a risk, and I think that is when it comes to the dashboard project. I mean, I will say it's something which I haven't had to look at a great deal, but what I've been looking at it with a slight alarm, thinking, God, there are going to be lots of claims that come out of this, but where exactly they are best directed, how you get capacity to scale in order to bring claims, etc. It could come from various directions, and as you say, the risk of the AI being used for people to start to put their information into it, to get the advice through the AI, is a real danger, and particularly the fact that, say, even that sophisticated one, the AI user internally was able to come up, was able to do a follow-on question, a follow-on prompt, etc. That's not generally available on ChatGPT. It's actually quite hard to get. It's not that sophisticated. So the publicly available ones for free, just aren't that great, but they are so accessible. So there aren't enough health warnings.
Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah, and I suppose fundamentally, if the online AI guidance is wrong or advice is wrong, who do you complain to?
No,
you
exactly.
complain to a computer. I mean, or an ivory tower in California. So I don't know. But anyway, Henry, do you want to say something at the very end and sort of help wind this thing up, or do you think there's a lot of risks out there, or what do you think, Henry?
I see opportunities from AI, and I hope that AI does not stand in the way of delivering dashboards, or because frankly, the capacity of the market is insufficient to meet the demand of individuals to ask questions. And if artificial intelligence can answer questions for people online which they need answering, that's good. So let's not let perfect get in the way of good. nevertheless, thank you. It's really interesting conversation. And I hope the recording will be published very shortly on my blog and elsewhere, so that people who weren't able to get to this event will be able to access the high quality advice and information you gave, Chris. So thanks very much.
Yeah, really good presentation, Chris. Thank you very much. And you're happy to share the slides as well? You'll be
Yeah, absolutely.
If anybody wants a copy of the slideshow, then email myself or Henry.
I want a copy as well. No, that's fine.
You got a copy? Yeah. You want a copy? Yeah, that's fine.
Perhaps Henry, you could put your put the recording of this session through an AI tool and see what it comes up as a synopsis.
Yeah, you can summarize everything I said to some bullet points.
Superior versions of Chat GPT, so it'll be shit in, shit out. I'm afraid, Barry. I don't think that's a good answer.
Yeah.
Sorry,
sorry, Chris. He's not talking about you, by the way. That's Thanks, Henry, for that lovely comment. But there we go. Chris, thank you very much indeed for your time and for your presentation. It's really interesting, and I think it's going to move forward very, very quickly. And trustees, providers, master trusts, everybody needs to wake up, because this is coming big time. So, really, really interesting subject, and I'm sure we'll do this again later in the year, I guess. So it's brilliant. So thanks to you, Chris. Thanks everyone for their questions. Enjoy the rest of your day. Let's pray for peace in the East, peace in the Middle East. And next week we'll hopefully be in conversation with another industry guru, but we'll come back to you on that. But enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining. And thanks again, Chris, for your input and presentation. It's brilliant. So thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your week. Yep. All right. Take care. Cheers. Bye. Bye.